I was about to say, I completely understand your points, but I do not necessarily agree.
I know.
Hey and welcome everybody to a new episode of Digitalog, and today we have a premiere because there are two people with me sitting on the couch, unlike usual where we only have one guest here with me, and we thought to not overwhelm you with too many new names, we thought inviting Thomas and Thomas. Therefore it's easy as usual, but with two different people today. And before we start right into the topic of opinionated and unopinionated coding, I would like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself in just a few words. So maybe Thomas, you want to start?
I would like to start. Thanks, Robert. Hi, I'm Thomas. I'm a software developer at DPM. And in my daily business, I'm working on web applications, websites, apps, and I have a strong focus on front-end engineering. But since I joined DPM almost a year ago, I'm trying to develop myself a bit more in a broader direction.
All right, thank you very much. Now it's your turn.
Well, hello, I'm Thomas as well. I'm also a software developer here at Die Produktmacher. I'm already a little bit broader, not only physically.
Yeah, but from the expertise.
From the expertise, yeah. I'm into almost everything what's concerned with coding. Therefore, I might have a few insights into what you're talking about today.
All right, so thank you for introducing yourself. And as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about opinionated and unopinionated coding, frameworks, whatever that means. For me as a non-techie person, it kind of overwhelms me already looking at the title, but therefore you are with me to explain what this topic is about and why we're talking about it. So maybe you can start with that and tell our listeners what it is and why we're talking about it.
Yes. So we're talking about it because with each new project, we as an agency starting, we need to decide which tech stack we want to use, we want to go with. And there are always several circumstances you need to consider. For example, which technology is already in use, which skills do I have in the team, what are the requirements on a specific product, what kind of product we're talking about. And so you have a really broad variety of tools you can choose from. And each of these tools is designed in a specific way. And the way a tool is designed can be opinionated or unopinionated.
Okay, so the topic is understood, but maybe let's talk about what is opinionated and what is unopinionated to make this crystal clear.
If I may chime in here, I have a opinion about that, obviously.
That's why I'm here. So tell me about your opinion.
Well, from my perspective, there isn't that big of a distinction between opinionated or unopinionated. I would even say there are no unopinionated tools in the technology space where we're working at. Since each and every one of those things that we are using, some person has created and always brings in their opinion.
There is probably one person behind the framework that has developed it, so there is an opinion in it. You said there is probably no unopinionated coding framework or something like that. Maybe let's tackle the term of opinionated and unopinionated a bit more in detail. So what does it mean if a coding framework is opinionated?
I would explain it so that the more opinionated a framework or a tool is, the more it gives you rules or guidelines you need to follow. And in exchange to follow these rules and guidelines, you get some benefits from it. For example, there is a very famous tool that's called Prettier. Prettier is a code formatter for front-end code. And it ensures, if you have it in your project, that each developer you're working in a team with follows the same rule of code formatting. Because we might have different laptops, we might have different settings, but if we both use the same tool and this tool comes with an opinion how to format code, we follow this opinion and the results of following this opinion will be more cleaner code. And so that means our own decision how we want to format that code is taken away from us until a certain extent, but as a result, we benefit from that.
Okay, this means when you're working in a team of more developers, the code, like how it is structured, will be more or less equal over all the different developers, which has the benefit that each and every one of them can like jump on the other code and review it a bit more, like better, and understand it faster.
The point here is, in this example of Prettier, that how code should be formatted is one of the strong discussion points between developers in general. But if you're working on a team, you cannot have the code to be formatted to each of those developers' likings, right? Because then no one would know what does that mean. Variable names, for example, or do I use semicolon or whatever? Tabs versus white space is a classical example, where there are wars fought. Well, we shouldn't probably say that at the current circumstances, but never mind. So in a bigger team, it's very important that we stick to some rules, especially for formatting, so that people can more easily understand the code. And therefore formatting is important, because otherwise you take a lot of mental load on stripping away this weird formatting you're probably not used to. Therefore formatting is a pretty good example for having something opinionated that helps you figure out those guidelines. But on the other hand, so you can go with the default rules for Prettier, for example, but you're always, so in this example, you can always adapt to that. So if your team decides to, I don't know, you want to
defining your own rules.
Your own rules. So for example, white space, tabs versus white space in indentation. So you can say, okay, we want to have tabs for whatever weird reason, and then you just do it, configure it into your Prettier config, and then everyone just uses that.
All right, and you already said that in reality there might unopinionated coding frameworks does not exist. But if we would tackle it from a theoretic point of view, what would be the difference between opinionated and unopinionated?
Well, that's let's go back to that Prettier example. So opinionated means you're using a tool. In that case, it's a code formatter, and you're going with the default settings of their tools. So the tool has a very strong opinion on how should you format your code. And if I go with this default settings and don't change anything, then I go with the opinion of that tool. And that means I don't have to think about myself, how should I set up this? I don't need to discuss with other people in the team, because I just follow the opinion of that tool. And as a benefit from that, it saves me some time. It saves me some discussion with the team, maybe.
Or not.
or not. And
but you have to take it once. Like you have to define it on a more global level, and then you should save some time and detail discussion.
You know how people are. There will always be discussions about those things, because we are human beings and we have opinions. So therefore, there will always be discussions. I would go a bit further on the what kind of tools may be opinionated, because or not opinionated. We have this other example, so famous front-end UI libraries or frameworks, for example, where you have on the one hand, which is sometimes called the unopinionated way of doing it, is something like React, where you have a lot of freedom how to structure your overall project, for example, where you don't have any specific file name conventions you have to stick to. And in contrast to that, there's something like Angular, for example, where you have very specific naming conventions, very specific folder structures that you should stick to. But sticking to those conventions, you get the benefit of you don't have to think about it, right? And on the other hand, what's the bigger difference for me here is that we had a lot of discussions about that, is that React by itself is, for me personally, only only a library for UI components. And Angular is really a framework giving you more guidance. And to explain that a little bit, the library is just for a very specific use case. And so when you need something like, so in React, you make some front-end components like how a button should behave or whatever. Therefore, React is very, very easy to use. But more complex topics like how do I need to do authentication, for example, or how should I do communication with the backend, for example, you have to choose on your own. Meaning the unopinionatedness or the libraryness of this thing, React, forces you to think about a lot of things that a framework like Angular takes away from you. So this taking away from you can be a benefit because you don't have to think about it. You can just use what is in there in the box, and you should be fine. You can still diverge from it, but this might not work so nicely.
All right, so simply put, an opinionated framework means I have some sort of a guide with me, which guides me in some sort of way. So it's less likely that I can explore left and right from this path, but it's easier for myself because I am guided along the way. But the unopinionated is more like the expert way, so to speak, because I have more to decide on my own. Or
yeah, it depends. We can maybe go a little bit into the pro and con discussion about.
Yeah, we already heard some benefits from the different like frameworks, but yeah, let's try to digest this.
Yeah, sure. For example, if you go with an unopinionated tool or framework, then you have, as we heard from Thomas, it's usually made for a certain purpose. So it solves one problem for you if you use it. That means we're building a whole application and we don't have only one issue to tackle, we have several. We want to render somehow our UI, we want to store data somewhere, we want to implement a routing so how the user can navigate to the page. And if we go with an unopinionated tool, then we need to choose for each of these parts of our application a several solution. We need to figure out what fits together, what works well in that scenario. I need to make myself comfortable with that tool. And that gives me, on the one hand, huge flexibility because I can choose which tools I want to use. And on the other hand, I have a lower entry barrier to learn that tool because each of these tools are less complex than if I would go with a huge, big, opinionated solution.
But I have a but here. So the lower entry barrier, from my perspective, comes only at the very beginning when you're starting to learn a new tool, for example, right? Because when you need to choose those other things that you, for use cases within your applications, you need to know about those tools and you need to dig very deep into what might be the best fitting. And because of that, sometimes, so in the React space, for example, there are for some use cases already kind of de facto standards for specific use cases like authentication or routing or whatever. So the unopinionatedness goes away already because there are opinions within the community what is the best tool to use. It's just not framed as a opinionated framework or library.
And that's why you said there is actually no unopinionated framework out there.
Giving another example, so one of the, what I feel is one of the biggest opinions inside of React is how the code itself in my files is structured. So there's everything kind of mixed together. I have HTML, I have JavaScript, and I have usually also the styling code, which is a very strong opinion about what should be taken together. So in other frameworks, those things are separated out for good reasons, some for bad reasons. There are, as I said, there are opinions. Both have value, both have the reasons to exist. You just need to find out which resonates best with your approach or with your team's approach towards different problems.
All right, so there's more like the discussion about less opinionated or more opinionated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, like you kind of touched it. Is there an influence on code quality if I decide either on the one or like on the more or on the less opinionated framework as well? I mean, you kind of touched that there are some more or some less guidance in those frameworks, but does it also have impact on coding quality or several other
I
criteria?
would not necessarily say code quality, because it always ends up at the developer how good the code is written. But I would agree if we talk about, I would say code stability, so how things work or how good they work. Because if I have a strong opinionated tooling and I follow the guidelines and opinions, and then I can be pretty sure that following these guidelines make the things work. For example, if I use a framework that tells me put your files in that certain structure and will automatically implement the routing for you, so the navigation for the user, and I follow these guidelines, then I'm pretty sure it works.
I have less chance to mess up.
I have less chance to mess up.
Because when I do not follow any guidelines or rules, then, as you said, this going right and left can also lead to going into
The wrong direction.
a wrong direction completely, and you will never find out because no opinionated thing told
Tells you that you're wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And then sometimes you might stick to it, and after you learned a little bit more about how to do stuff, you might look at your code from probably 2 weeks ago and think, damn, probably I should have thought this over.
Is it then like a decision if you're more or less experienced developer to choose the less or more opinionated?
And there are contrary opinions about that. So when we're talking with our more junior colleagues, most of them tend to say they like the flexibility and freedom of something like React. I would argue from my little bit of experience that I have gathered so far that the more guidance you get, the better you will become. Because same point as just before, you have less chance to go wrong, and when you're guided through some specific use cases, you will learn how to think properly about some kind of problems. So this flexibility always comes with a cost, especially a mental load cost, having to think about kind of everything in the first place. So if boilerplate stuff, let's call it like that, is taken away from you by an opinionated framework, then you can focus on the real business case, about the real business logic that you need to implement, which should be the main part of your work from my perspective in day-to-day life, and not to think about which library I want to choose for one specific use case, for example, or implement it on your own even.
Do you follow this opinion, or do you like have a different view on it?
I was about to say I completely understand your points, but I do not necessarily agree.
I know.
As I said before, if you use an unopinionated tool, you have a lower entry barrier, and therefore more junior developers are more motivated to work with the tool. They achieve fast results, and they have a strong learning curve at the very beginning. But also on the long run, they develop themselves further because they are forced to look more into the code of the tool. They are forced to understand how it works under the hood, and they can experience from that and learn from that and apply that to their own approach how to solve things.
All right, so you both guys have to work on your poker face, because I can see in your facial expression that the different opinion is arising. So yeah, maybe jump on that.
Yeah, I think so. From the standpoint of, you may dive deeper into the unopinionated framework, that might be true, but the problem here will be that you have a lot of different unopinionated things you have to look into, and not only one thing or one specific thing. So you might get overwhelmed as a junior developer. into all the stuff you need to look into. And with an opinionated or a framework tooling, you can concentrate, as I already said, on the business logic and probably on a very specific topic at hand, a problem at hand that you have, and then go from there and look into the specific parts of the framework, how it's supposed to work, and then you learn more step by step. But I agree with the topic that the entry barrier might be higher for an opinionated thing, because you might not directly understand why something the framework forces on you somehow, right? I can totally agree with that. But in the long run, I would say the entry barrier is still lower for an opinionated or framework approach.
All right, so at this point, I think I have to play the facilitation role a bit more, because I feel that we could discuss that for quite a long time, as it's actually being out there already. But I think it gives a good overview on what the discussion is about. And I think the short discussion that we had about this is a good representation of what the topic is about. Therefore, I would like to go more into the direction of how we at DPM deal with that topic. What does it mean for us, and how do we decide on what the tech stack should look like? So maybe you can share your very personal opinion and experience that you have on that topic, how you deal with that day to day.
Do you want to start?
I can start. As we said in the beginning, it differs from project to project. So what we always try to do is figuring out what are the circumstances, who is in the team, what's the project about, what are the requirements, and then we need to decide which tools we go with. And I can share from a personal experience at DPM. It was about a project. We are building an app. And in this specific case, it was not only a technical consideration we took, but also from the design department, because we decided that we want to go with material design. And material design is a design guideline, design framework made by Google. And there are also technical libraries that implement these design guidelines.
Just a quick note here. It's funny that, for example, this Material UI is a very opinionated design framework, right? It's not a technical framework, not a coding or engineering framework, but it's a design framework, which is very, very opinionated, and which can help the designers as well focus on the real topic at hand and not too much of the fancy stuff like micro interactions, for example, because they are already tackled by this framework.
So the discussion is not only in the techie world, so to speak, but should be also in the design world, and maybe also for product management as well. When we're talking about the framework that Jira or something is offering, then maybe there are like these topics arising in different fields of where we are in touch with. So
definitely, it's also a consideration of how much budget do we have, how long does it take to invent our own design system, how long does it take to take over or adapt an existing one. And in that specific scenario I'm describing, we went with material design. We choose a framework that fits very well to this approach, or that actually takes away the implementation of these design guidelines from us, and choose a stack that fits around the decision that we want to build an app, and we have the requirement from the design implementing material design.
Sorry, quick note on this point here for the techies out there, because we're not building a native app, it will be a hybrid app. Therefore, most of the stuff we're doing will be in HTML based.
Like a progressive web app.
Yeah, like a progressive web app, and then deployed inside a native container. And we could have gone for a different approach here as well. Like there are frameworks around like Ionic, for example, and they are on a technical basis also already very opinionated. How UI or mobile UI components should be implemented and should look like. And because this opinionatedness on the design on the Ionic framework was the reason why we chose against that framework, and we're now using another little less opinionated framework with a library that helps us implementing the opinionated design framework on top of that.
So it was like a co-decision taking between development and design. Yeah. So just for your context out there, as we are at DPM like distributed in different teams with different expertises. So obviously development and the tech department has its expertise in those fields, but we also have the design and the product management department. So they are coming the different expertises at the same table, so to speak, and we can take a joint decision on that. Yeah. And that's what you did there in this project that you mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, the key takeaway in this scenario was that there is no better or worse approach when we talk about opinionated or unopinionated framework. It really depends on the circumstances, but it's important to know that there are these kinds of toolings and we need to know about them, and we need to know what do they bring with it. What does it mean for us if we use them?
Another example from a different project that we're working on currently, the base of the tech stack here, or of the front-end tech stack at least, is React as an unopinionated library, I would say. But we have chosen for using Next.js, which is a opinionated framework on top of that, right? Where you have the benefits of, most of the standard tooling that you need for this kind of application or for this kind of website, you already have a good default choice. So we don't have to tackle the problem like, okay, what are we doing with routing? How we are approaching the communications with the backend. If we were to go with React by its own, we have to choose, do we want to use Axios for example, to go to the backend API or whatever? And having this base unopinionated, as I said, I don't like the term, less opinionated framework like, or a library like React.js, and on top of that, a more opinionated framework like Next.js was a good approach here as well.
So talking about the tech stack for one certain project is not that you have like this black or white decision at the beginning to go with a less or a more opinionated, but it's like different puzzle pieces that you have to decide for every puzzle piece, which would be the most efficient and the most appropriate way to go with.
And for example, a couple of other puzzle pieces that you need to take care of is what Thomas already said at the very beginning, kind of, what are the circumstances at the customers? So do they have developers that need to take over the project after we've done? For example, do they have the expertise in framework library XYZ or don't they? How long is this thing supposed to be maintained, for example, is also an important question to ask. So
does it fit in their current taste?
Exactly. Yeah. And our expertise is important here. So how is our team structured? How can we staff? For example, a project is very important to put in here. And obviously business considerations like time to market might be important in terms of how much can I take away from the setup time at the beginning and use a more opinionated framework as opposed to having to write most of the stuff from scratch, or having to look for what fits into this unopinionated library that I'm currently trying to achieve something with.
And as always, as you said, the budget is always like an influencer for decision.
Definitely.
So in your example, you said that the limited budget led you to one decision towards material as a framework because it works for development and design in both ways.
Right? Because in this occasion, design can have doesn't need to focus on minute things like micro interactions, but can really focus on the functionality. And as I said, doesn't have to think about, do I want to fancy this? How should the transition for a modal, for example, look like? Because this is already done by the material UI, or by the material design framework, and therefore they don't need to take too much time to invent something completely new. And it's a valid approach to use something like that from a design perspective as well. But I know that designers usually tend to not like material design too much, because sometimes they feel what we already said also on the tech side, that they lack the flexibility sometimes. What are the things that they can adapt? So because
freedom chooses taken away.
But probably some of the designers listening to us can somehow sympathize with that you need to take some compromises at some point. How much do I want to be able to do on my own, and how much do I must do on my own, right?
Yeah, I can relate to that. So like from my more UX perspective, I definitely can relate to that, because sometimes it's easier at least to start with a more opinionated, because there's much that I can just like puzzle pieces put together, and then I at least have something already. But of course, if I want to aim for like the most individual thing that represents my brand in a completely other way than all the others are doing out there, then it's probably not the best way to use a framework that tons of people out there are using as well. So
definitely.
As you said, like the business considerations also has to take place somewhere in this decision.
Exactly.
All right. I think that was a very vivid discussion until now, and I liked it a lot.
We could take on for hours.
Yeah, I feel so, and I would do it for hours if it would not be Friday afternoon. But nevertheless, as always, we try to sum up all the different points at the end, just to have like a key takeaway for all the listeners out there. Because, as I said, we talked a lot, and now we want to like squeeze it into what are the key takeaways that all the listeners out there have to take with them, or have to take into consideration when they face the challenge of how I have to design and concept my tech stack for a certain project.
My key takeaways would be aware that there are differences in how tools and frameworks are structured. Do they have opinion or not? Be aware of your tech stack. Choose wisely, and last but not least, and we forgot completely to set that, it should always make fun to work with the stuff. So that's also one of the factors that definitely need to set. It should make fun, and it should bring the project and the client forward.
So for the team, it should motivate them to work with the tech stack that you have chosen. Yeah. So totally makes sense. From your perspective, Thomas.
Key takeaways. I think, and I emphasized this a lot already, that you should think that there is no such thing as an unopinionated technological whatever. It's just how much something forces a certain approach onto you, and how much does that is that fine for you, and how much it isn't, and which parts you can compromise and on which parts not. And the most important part really is to look into the details of the circumstances around, because there's very seldomly, if you're always doing the same kind of projects, like, I don't know, XYZ CMS with put out some website or whatever, then you probably have a template tech stack which you can use. But we usually tend to have a very broad range of different types of applications that we're building, and there is very seldomly a one-size-fits-all solution. And we, as DPM, always look very deep into the circumstances there, on the client side, on our side, and what's the main goal of the project. And this is something that you always need to consider, and not, I want to use React because everyone uses React, or I want to use Angular because it's the business enterprisey thing. Mm-hmm. This is usually not there is no easy answer. You have to go through a couple of steps and dig a little bit deeper into the details of the requirements and the context where you're working at.
So one could put it as an experienced consultant saying, well, it depends. So definitely. With those famous words, I have to thank you a lot for being here. It was a pleasure. It was a fun discussion. I liked it a lot. Hopefully see you soon again. you have my vote. So again, thank you all for listening out there. As always, if you have feedback for us, comment on whatever platform you're visiting or watching or listening us. So we are happy about every feedback, either positive or constructive negative feedback as well. So give us a thumbs up if you liked it, share it if you want others to see it as well, and then hopefully see you soon in the next episode. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, and
thank you for having us.
For all that are listening on a Friday, like we do, have a nice weekend.
Have a nice week.
Bye.
Right, bye-bye. I actually tried to hold back myself all the time because I was always watching at you, and in the background there's this olive oil, and I was like, well, that was not there the last time. How did it get there, and what does it mean?
Techies like to introduce Easter eggs into their projects.
So this is like your interpretation of an Easter egg.
Yeah.
I think we don't have to show the brand, but it's olive oil. You can trust myself. So what does it mean?
Well, the working title of this meeting was Thomas versus Thomas. And I asked myself today in the morning, okay, are we going to hit each other? And then Thomas asked me,
yeah, probably we should oil our bodies so we can have a proper mud wrestling fight or something like that. But nobody wants to see that, obviously.
That's why
I would like to see that actually. But okay, maybe we have we had to raise the age.
Yeah.
Permission.
Rated R.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So I got it.